Hello and welcome to CTO Life Line number 10. And today's episode title is Lessons from a Career Leading Change. I'm co-host Daniel Walters, a CTO coach and former CTO, CIO, CPTO for companies like Seek and others. And with me is co-host Noah Cantor. How are you doing, Noah?
Doing all right. It's good to be back. Good to see you again. For those who don't know me, I'm Noah Cantor. I'm a tech leadership coach and CTO. I've been working in and around tech for more than 20 years now, and kind of organizations of all sizes in all different roles. And now I spend a lot of my time kind of helping others figure out where they want to go and what they want to be doing and how to get there.
Excellent. Now, before we get into today's topic, we have some housekeeping, Noah.
Yes. So first, we will answer questions as we go. There will be a recording that's hosted on LinkedIn and YouTube available for viewing afterwards. And to help other people find the show, please subscribe to the LinkedIn, YouTube channels, like the talks, and you'll help us out.
Excellent. And just in the nick of time, we have our very special guest joining us, Fred George. Welcome to the stage, Fred George.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Now, I could only put in a partial bio for you, Fred, because it was so extensive. But would you like to share a little bit about yourself in terms of your career?
Well, basically, I'm a programmer, but I've had some experience in doing general management through my career. So I wrote my first code in 1968, so over half a century of development experience, doing a lot of things wrong in the process, hopefully getting a little closer to good at this point. I'm kind of semi-retired at this point, so I still work for clients that have interesting problems in interesting places. If a problem is not sort of impossible or nearly impossible, I'm not interested. So that's kind of what I'm doing most of.
You mentioned a few different groups that you engage in, and I love that you started with the programmers or the developers as your very first line. So do you want to share a little bit about those sort of groups, the programmers and the leaders and the connection between them?
Well, fundamentally, I kind of enjoy programming. So that's why I still do it, because it's fun. It's solving problems, always unique problems. So I still like doing that. So a lot of the things I do in consulting is getting to be the point where I can spend more time doing programming. So part of my engagements is certainly working with the executives to help understand what problems they're really trying to solve, and giving them some idea of what sort of impact they will have in the sort of changes I'm talking about. Because obviously when you talk to executives, you don't worry about pair programming or TDD and some other engineering practices, but you want to talk about the ability for the team to react to change easily. That we don't have to pin down all the requirements up front. We can reduce your time to market significantly by having a team that's able to react to changes and almost deliver in a continuous fashion. So it's important to sort of get that level set to the executives before you start that engagement. Turns out the programmers are easy to convince that this is a fun way of working, because it is fun. So they move into a more productive, fun working environment. But it's also creates some threats to people that are sitting between the developers and these senior executives. People who tend to be a little more risk averse. They say, well, why do I want to take a chance on trying a new process or a new language or a new technique or something like that? And so when they start running up to the executives to talk about what's that disaster that's happening down in development, I want the executive to already be armed with exactly what's going on. And so these risk-averse people sort of bounce off the executive. When the executive likes what's happening, they kind of shut up and go away. So you will have naysayers coming in throughout the process when you make these process changes, because change is one of these things people don't like. Particularly if you're sitting in a nice, cushy job somewhere in middle management.
So let's start kind of exploring the programmers just a little bit more. So you talked about the fact that programmers love these practices, which feels a little hand-waving. It sounds like there's a little more involvement in there. Do all programmers enjoy the shift? And how do you actually explore with programmers what the shift means and how to get them on board?
So basically, in most cases, I run a training program that runs about a week, 40 hours of hands-on stuff. And here we introduce sort of the heavyweight agile engineering practices, the TDD, the pair programming, rotating pairs, constantly pushing your code. We sort of introduce those processes as we go. And we reinforce it with a set of exercises that say we're going to write code in a different style. Just an example of when I was working with Nationwide Insurance, I can talk about that because they published it. The legacy system had 72 Java classes. When we rewrote the system, they had 1,400 classes. So we're teaching a different programming style, which I tend to call Lego style. We're going to build lots of little Lego bricks and allow you to assemble them in all sorts of very easy ways. It also allows me to adopt to change much more easily versus sort of building something that's fit to purpose. But once you build that tower one way, it's really hard to tear it down and put it in another room at the bottom. And yet with this Lego programming style, it's much easier to do that. So I teach them that style of programming. And I would say that 80% of the people will come out of that having the understanding of that. 20% will be immediately more productive. But there is about 20% of the people who are like, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't understand how to take a problem and tear it down into such a small piece. They kind of lack that conceptual skill. The other group that kind of drops out is the guys who are sort of in team lead positions, like I'm the Java tech lead. And we say, we're not going to use Java anymore. Well, I'm a Java tech lead. I have to tell people what to do, because that's my job, is to tell them what to do, not do it myself. And they're kind of embarrassed by other people in the group understanding how to do it better. And so they drop out because it's kind of embarrassing to show that they don't know as much as the new guys do. So about 80% of the team sort of, basically subscribes to this stuff. So again, the breakdown of people who don't pick this up, people that lack conceptual skills. And I would sort of in offhand comments say they probably shouldn't be programmers. There are a lot of people in this profession that should not be in this profession, don't really have that skill. And then the people who feel threatened by younger people knowing more and faster than they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
So we get them up to speed, and that establishes a little bit of trust in that here's a technique that we may want to try with your real program. But most of them come out of the training saying, well, okay, I understand how this works for your exercises, but I got a real problem to solve. I don't think this will work for my real problem. And that's where I now drop down and sit down and write code with them. So we'll take their problem, we'll carve it into Legos, we'll start implementing the Legos, we'll start pushing continuously, writing full tests. Generally, about 60% of my code is going to be test code. We have this giant safety net, and we just continue to go fast throughout the process because we have this safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a little bit because we've established some trust in me and some of my techniques through the class. They sort of give me my head and let me try these things. And again, once they catch on how to do this, then you have established a change that's sort of persistent. And its change doesn't take a long time. I've heard people talking about agile transformations. We're going to spend 5 years doing an agile transformation. I finished mine up in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
In 3 months, the team is up to speed. They know how to do this stuff. You can begin to bring more people on board with it, pick it up from their colleagues. You can start splintering the team, sort of butting them off into individual teams, taking their knowledge with them. And that's what we did when we did this for the Norwegian Welfare Association. We started with a small team. We got them up to speed comfortable. We kept adding more people to the point where we got too big. Then we butted off for a different team to go do it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of that approach called team mitosis, if I've got the...
Yeah, and it's one of the things that most organizations stop doing for some reason. It's like a new manager comes in and says, wow, my team is really productive. Let's say, yeah, you need to butt off another team. Oh, no, I can't lose my people. I've trained these people. They're mine. I don't care about your problem.
Yeah. I've seen that. And there are perverse incentives involved in that as well.
Well, yeah, and I call it, I actually had a name for that. I used to call it, now I forgot the name for that. Success conservatism. That once you got a really successful team, you stop making changes. Even though there are changes that can make you even better, they are not willing to hear those. Even though we've established that trust with them, they'll still back away from it.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit more. So you've got this team that's on the journey to improvement. And over 3 months, you're going to take them from their starting point to a point where they are much more functional, delivering better code, having more fun doing it. What's the journey that the managers and the executive have to go on in order for that to be successful?
Well, the executive needs to be, first of all, you need to keep the executive continually involved in this process. So once a week, you need to go talk to that executive, tell them what's going on. If you got something to show, even better. But you want to show them you're getting that fast progress, how fast you're shipping code, all these other things. You want to make sure he's continually up to date with what's going on. You don't want him to sort of forget about you, because he will get knocks on his door about people saying, "Oh my God, you know what these guys are doing down there." You want to make sure he does know what's going on down there, and he's happy with it. Now, the guys in the middle, to some degree, you have to spend a lot of time with those, because if you're truly doing agile management versus more traditional management, it's probably a more radical change than for the programmers, because now you're all about sort of understanding we're going to have fast failure. We're not going to have defect prevention. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to correct mistakes so fast, it isn't worth trying to keep them from happening. And so we're going to take advantage of the fast. We're working fast, and we can fix problems equally fast if they do arise. And it's sort of getting used to basically riding that wild horse. One of the things you have to realize about programming is it's not predictable. So as much as we try to put processes around it and try to make it predictable, only with statistical models does it become predictable. Individual items like stories are highly unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I saw one presentation many years ago at a conference that says 85% of the cost of a change has to do with the legacy code you're changing, not the thing you're putting in. Which means, for all intents and purposes, all changes are cost the same. It's the code you're sticking into that causes the unknowns. Mm-hmm. The bigger your code base, the bigger the unknown. And so it's sort of getting the managers used to the fact we're going to be unpredictable on individual items, but look at the trend across many different items. And that's why you begin to put metrics in place that sort of reflect the progress the team is making. Let's just count how many stories we finished. So every day we finish a story, let's take credit for that. Let's take credit for that. Every little story counts. So over time, you can begin to see how many stories we get done over a fixed amount of time. You know how fast this team is actually working on this problem with these people. Because every project, every team is going to be different. You can't take production from one team and say that's going to be the production for the next team. You got to sort of watch what happens over a fairly limited amount of time, 6 to 8 weeks. You'll have trends. And with that trend, and we track those trend lines, with that trend line, you're able to say, okay, are we at risk or not? Is this going to meet your dates? Or what else is going on? A lot of times, the most promising thing you see happening as you look at these charts is scope creep. It says, oh, yes, we originally thought we were going to have 100 stories. Okay, now it's 150 stories. Now it's 175 stories. So when are you going to finish? I'm saying, well, when do you stop adding stories? Mm-hmm. Fortunately, the metrics will let you see that. It says, okay, here's the real problem, executive. The business keeps changing their mind. Now, by the way, we can react to their changing their mind. That's not an issue. But if you want to know when we're going to finish, ask them when they're going to stop adding requirements.
I'd like to dig into building that connection with the two groups we've highlighted at the top. So starting with the programmers, do you feel like because you're engaging with them as a fellow programmer, it makes it easier to build that trust and get on the same page?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wear nerd T-shirts. I got 3-piece suits, bespoke suits in my closet. I don't wear those with programmers. Mm-hmm. You got to look like a programmer. You got to act like a programmer. And I don't have any trouble acting like a programmer. I mean, I get excited when tests pass. I pump my fist in the air. So they know I'm enjoying it, and they're enjoying it. And again, when they have success, I praise them for the success. Positive reinforcement for that stuff. So yeah, I look like, once they get over the fact I'm old and got gray hair and jowls are hanging down and stuff like that, once they get past that point, they realize I'm just one of the other nerds. So I get treated that way. One of the things you have to be careful of in my situation is I got to make sure I'm getting them to answer the questions. If I start saying, "Oh, here's how we're going to do it," they'll just brains turn off. It's not sustainable unless I keep their brains involved. So part of my process is backing off of how to do things and making them think about how to do it. Let them fail a little bit. ask them the right questions and lead them to the right place. So basically, there's a lot more coaching associated with that part of the process than is me writing code. One of the things
so that sounds a lot more coaching oriented. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you want to ask the question that leads them to the answer. Only when it gets really hard or we get really desperate for time crunch do I actually just go in there and write the solution. Now, one of the things I do is after hours, we'll sit down and play with the code a little bit. I'll play with the next thing we're going to work on. I'll play with the ideas a little bit. I'll try some things out. I'll have my failures. So I show up the next day with at least some idea of what's going to work. So we're not completely going off in the dark.
So let's move to the executives then. So maybe let's talk about some of the nature of the challenges that they bring to you to help solve. And then also how you approach building trust. Maybe you pull out the three-piece suit then.
Well, you certainly want to make sure that the executives are on board with what you're trying to accomplish. Because one of the things you're going to build is you're going to build a very empowered team, a team that probably doesn't need a lot of traditional day-to-day management by a first-line manager. They're going to figure out what their assignments are. They're going to allocate their resource accordingly, work on the right things. Take one for the team when they need to, do some of the dirty work as necessary. So they're going to learn how to do that. And one of my things to the executives before we start is, by the way, once I get them excited by this, you cannot go back. Because if you go back, they'll quit. Because they'll go find a job that lets them continue to do what they're doing, which is a lot of fun. I had one of my clients basically come back to me a year afterwards and says, "You're right. They don't want to go back. I can't take them back." Now, on the other hand, when you have that conversation with executives, some of the executives don't want you to go do some of these things. I've certainly had conversations with some executives when I was in the UK. I was meeting with the CTO and the senior VP of programming, and I kind of described what's going to happen, all this other stuff. Heard after the meeting, the VP of programming told the CTO, "There's no way in hell I'm going to let this guy in my office." So that's the sort of thing I want to know up front.
So let me ask you then, if you're working with a CTO, or if you're potentially working with a CTO, or even change the perspective, if someone is a CTO and is having some of the problems that you can help with, are there things they can do to kind of self-assess and figure out whether or not they're a good fit for what you want to do?
I think there are a lot of bad signs that something's going wrong.
Okay.
I would say that I used to have this agile checklist that says, here's how you score how agile you are. And it had a lot of negative numbers.
Okay.
So like if you have a documented agile process, minus 10. If you have a team that's responsible for your agile process, minus 20. If you're doing agile the same way in all your groups, not minus 5. So I had a presentation I called Agile Schizophrenia. It says if you're doing Agile the same way in all your teams, you're not Agile. Because Agile is about adapting to the problem and the people you have in the way that makes sense. So I have teams that they start using the process, and some of the things like pair programming or maybe test-driven development. And at the right time, they stop doing some of these things because they don't need them in their process anymore. Other teams are like, I'm sorry, you guys, you cannot check in code unless it's done by a pair. I mean, that's the rule, hard and fast until you begin to trust yourselves. So to some degree, signs that you haven't got this is, first of all, my productivity is unknown. I don't know how fast I'm getting work done. Okay. So if you don't know how fast work is getting done, there are metrics, story counts across that way. There are metrics that let you capture that. So if you don't know what's getting done, yet you have a problem you need to solve. I have a client right now, and they're working a lot in India, and they don't know how productive the Indian resource is. They just don't know. And the problem is their work items they're handing the programmers are things that take weeks or months. So there's no way to get any sort of flow when your metric is a week or a month or whatever. And of course, all items in their mind are created the same. Of course, they're not the same. So they're not getting that insight about how fast they're working. So you need to go into that environment. That's what we're doing. We're carving it up into much smaller pieces of work that we can measure in terms of flow and begin to assess whether the team is being productive or not. So that's one sign. I guess another sign is you think you have an agile process, but your first sprint is about doing architecture. Your second sprint is about doing design. Your next sprint is about writing code. Your next sprint is about fixing the bugs in the code. That's not sprints. That's a waterfall process. So again, look at what labels you're applying to these things to see if you really are working in an environment where you're almost in that continuous delivery process. What type of ceremonies does it take to get code out the door? I mean, is there a team in place? Are there sign-off pages and all sorts of stuff like that? When I was working for the Daily Mail, I was interviewing for that job. A guy walked in, put some paper on the CTO's desk, and I kind of knew what it was. I said, "What is that?" "Well, that's the sign-off sheet for the deployment." Of course, he just puts his initials on and passes it back. He didn't even look at it. Well, I said right then, if that piece of paper shows up on my desk, I'm going to go shred it. So again, process over delivery sort of thing. So if you have those sort of issues, that's kind of where you can sort of rethink some of the process.
I joined a company where on the first Monday of the week after I joined, they laid out all the bits of paper I had to sign or review or all those things. And it was like 30 bits of paper. So I took a photograph of it and shared it to the rest of the executive team. I was like, okay, this is where we're starting. We're reducing this. That was our measurable thing. So Fred, do you also look for alignment across the executive team? Like if you've been engaged by a CTO trying to solve a problem, are you looking for whether they've got buy-in from other executives, or does that matter less in the approach you take?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there. Could you just give me a shorter question?
Oh yeah. So do you look for alignment across the executives? Say if you're engaged by the CTO, are you looking for alignment with the CEO or other executive, their other peers?
Not particularly. Generally, if CTO is having trouble with his colleagues in that respect, that'll come out somewhere in the CTO conversations. I have had a situation where the CTO was not aligned with the rest of the group. They were looking for much more predictability and sort of cookie cutter sort of process stuff. And it wasn't he understood programming. He knew that was not the way to do programming, but he really didn't know how to engage his executive colleagues to have that conversation productively. And eventually he left the company. So that's, sort of a sad footnote to that story was that he couldn't make the alignment work. If I sense there's non-alignment here, then I've sort of almost turned into the CTO coach about how do you need to get some of your colleagues lined up. There's certainly a way to sort of get, sometimes my best allies are actually the business executives. Because the CTOs have been telling me, oh, it's going to take you 6 months to do this, and you better be sure you need it. And if you got to make sure you tell me what you need in the next 6 months ahead of time. I can go to the business guys and say, I can adapt even quicker than that. So a true story, I was working in California at a startup there. We were doing some work for one of the big, hospitality organizations. And we said, we're going to get you the first level of this system out in 12 weeks. So at 10 weeks, we actually got it ready and we turned it on. And I got a call from the VP of development saying, can you turn it back off again? I say, why? Well, we never told IT about you because we didn't believe your schedule.
Okay.
So that's a case where the technology organization was not aligned with what we were trying to do. The business was falling in love with us because they were saying, well, if you can react that quickly, well, how about this idea? How about this idea? How long will it take you to get this done? And we give them an answer in weeks versus months or years. So they got really excited. CTO was not necessarily our fan at that point. But that's a case where sometimes the business side is actually much more excited by that. Now, there is a cost to the business getting involved with this. One of the things you require if you're really going to react this quickly is we need a business person in the room with us as we do this. When I was in Norway working on the Welfare Association, I had the lawyer that could read the law sitting next to me. I mean, she was the lawyer reading the Norwegian code to me. And I'd ask her a few questions, and she'd try to tell me too much. No, stop. I'll worry about that later. I'm just going with some Legos here first. But I had her sitting beside me. That was a continuous involvement. When I was working in Nationwide Insurance, the business person was sitting next to us, and we were having constant conversations with her. That is very, very valuable. when the business person, when we're again working for one of the, or did some work for one of the big automobile manufacturers, and we took one of their business person and set him in the room with us. That was part of the deal. And then it turned out that with the CEO, the business guys came and complained to the CEO that the CTO is taking some of my resource away. And the CEO turned to the CTO and said, you have my permission to yell back at the business guys. They've been asking you to be reactive for the last years. You're finally reactive and they're complaining. You can yell back at them. So you have to, again, that comes to your alignment question. Most of the time, the business is not ready for how fast we can work. The speed at which we work creates all sorts of troubles to the organization. How fast can you deploy? Well, we want to deploy constantly. What we mean, not once every week? No, we mean 10 or 15 times a day. And they say, but you can't do that. Yes, we can. You're in the way. Let's figure out how to fix that. It's been done. When I was working in Norway, I think the previous year across the entire organization, they deployed 300 times. In the first 4 months I worked with them, we deployed 1,600 times. And after next year was something like 4,000 or 5,000, and now the organization is constantly deploying like that. You can make that transition.
So we talk about fast, and you talk about fast, and there's a lot of emphasis on speed in the work that you do. A lot of the organizations that Daniel and I have worked with, for better or for worse, when they focus on speed, they end up in this death spiral where at first they go fast and then over time they go slower and slower and slower and slower. Your approach sounds different. Can you tell us how?
Well, I think to some degree we're constantly pumping the code out. And so, and again, once the business gets used to how fast they can get something done, they'll try experiments. And I think that's what changes the attitude. Now, if you change CTOs, if you change business executives, some of this stuff can begin to fall apart. A new CTO comes in and says, well, you know, I really want to have a fixed schedule about this stuff. And, oh, the business really wants to know exactly when this is going to be delivered. I need to make a commitment to it. Versus, we're going to work as fast as we can on the most important thing you want to work on.
So I think the direction of my question is slightly different in that I think some of the organizations that we worked with, the executive continually pushes speed and continually talks about speed. And what we see as a consequence of that is often compromised quality.
Well, I mean, to some degree, I teach my team that that technical debt is a euphemism for either one, I'm ignorant, or two, I'm lazy. Take your pick. I won't tolerate being lazy. So when somebody says, oh, the code's ready, but I need to refactor it, the answer is the code is not ready. And that's one of the things I teach the programmers. When the manager comes and says, well, how much you got done? Is it 60%, 8%? It's not done.
It's binary.
It's a binary thing. It's either done. And that's one of my metrics. My metrics are, here's a story that's been completed. If it's not completed, it's not done. Don't think about 80%, 70%. It's not done. So you focus on the binary nature of that. And to some degree, it's basically sometimes not even the manager forcing this. It's actually the programmers who sort of feel guilty that I wish I was doing a little more productive. So yeah, I've kind of finished all the code. I haven't really tested it all yet and may need to refactor it. But he has that conversation with somebody like that says, okay, I'll take it now. I try to teach them not to have that conversation.
So you're putting responsibility for quality and completeness in the hands of the people actually writing the code.
Yeah, and to some degree, the code will sort of lower itself down to whatever the minimum is that the team will tolerate. So if you got somebody there who's completely anal about this stuff and has to have absolutely everything perfect, the team quality will sort of stay at that level until he leaves, in which case it drops down to the next guy who's sort of complaining about it. If you wind up sort of wiping all those guys out, yeah, it sort of drops down and nasty things happen. I mean, one of the things that I see happen a lot of times over a lot of my projects is all those nice unit tests we wrote, 60% of our code, the programmer says, well, I can write the code, but I gotta make sure the tests work. So again, he's asking permission to do the test of his manager. He shouldn't be asking that permission. You don't ask permission to write an else statement. You don't ask permission to write an if statement. You're going to ask permission to write a test. So
well, to put it in another to put it in another context, if I was working on a plane, I wouldn't say, I've screwed in all the nuts, but I haven't tightened them all, So
Exactly.
bad things
Okay,
happen.
can I spell it? Can it fly? Well,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah. So to some degree, it's kind of making sure that the team sort of feels that responsibility, and you give them the tools by which to say no to.
It also sounds like there's some work you can do with managers to help them kind of ask better questions.
Well, and that's why you have to spend time with those guys as well, to sort of tell them, okay, your job, you're trying to manage something that's unmanageable to some degree. It's not predictable. So understand it's not predictable. So now, how do you support the team? What can you do to make the team more productive? And it's going to be things like, go grab me a SQL expert when I need one, so I don't sit there struggling and trying to figure out how to write a horrible SQL query when I don't know how to do that yet. Don't let me sort of sit there and struggle, try to find me some help. One of the titles I used when I was at the Daily Mail was I called myself the concierge. And the reason I call myself the concierge works for the team. I'm not the manager who tells the team what to do. I'm the concierge who's supporting the team. It's management inversion. And we always know our best managers we ever had were management inversion guys who realize they work for the team. And so a little bit is training the programmers to sort of treat the manager as a resource the same way they do their terminal or PC, but also to train the managers how to be that concierge, not to be the guy who's telling them what to do, but to be the guy asking, what can I do to make you better? What can I do to help you get this done? Who do I need to go beat up on this stuff?
Should a CTO try to do what you do?
Well, if I was a CTO, this is what I would do. So I guess the answer is yes. And I've worked with CTOs which were, stunningly good architects and developers. One of the CTO of the Daily Mail was a stunningly good architect. And I walked in as title of chief architect. There's no architecture required. He had it nailed. I was more of the transformation agent in that case. But I say if you have a technical CTO, you could sort of do some of this stuff. But the key is to make it a pilot. One of the things you can do wrong is to try to do this with everybody at the same time. What you need to do is pick a team, pick an interesting project. It can't be trivial or get marginalized, but it can't be too hard either, because you want to orchestrate to success. So put a small team in place and have them do it, and watch the results. Watch the enthusiasm of the people. Now, as a manager, if you're really doing proper management, you're going to look at the morale of the team, enthusiasm, all these other things you're getting out of this team, as well as being productive. Now you have these guys convincing other people to do it. Now you have your team. You can talk as a manager to another team, and their manager says, "Let me tell you what's going to happen. Programming is unpredictable, and it's okay. But here's how you help wrestle the beast down. Here's how you know what's really going on."
How do you identify the right people to be in that first team? Can it be just be an existing team?
It can be an existing team, but if I put them through the training, I know who I want to work with. Because now I've seen them react to conceptualization issues. I've seen them react to how they pair with other people and how they treat their colleagues. And so I will go into my class of 12 and I'll pick out 5 people I work with initially. And it'll be the 5 people I think I convince how to do this quicker. Because once they understand how to do it well, I can bring another person to pair with them. And basically, with this sort of arithmetic, I can grow a team by 50% a month. So if I started with a team of 6, after a month, I could probably go to 9. After another month, I could be up at 13. And then another month, I'm going to be sitting at 20. It doesn't take very long. With 12 months, I'm covering 100 people.
There's something really powerful, isn't there, where if you've got a team of, say, 5 and they're all well versed in that way of working, then the 6th person joining, will basically model to the behaviors of that group. Whereas if it was the inverse, one person, they need to be much more intentional to try and shift where the group's at.
Yeah, we used to call that geek in a parachute. And I can pull off geek in a parachute, but that's strong personality, experience, and a lot of other things. I will never turn one programmer loose from my class and try to take it back to their team. I mean, at least go back and pair.
Yeah.
So they can at least pair together and show everybody else how more productive they are than what they're currently doing. But better off is basically getting the team to such a size and get it to 10 people, make 2 teams of 5. That's much more productive. Now, one of the things we experimented on with the Nordic company I worked with a couple of years ago was we ran through the training class, we started working on a project, and immediately added some more people to the team to see if they could pick it up from their colleagues. And they could. Within a couple of days, they were doing the same thing as their colleagues did that went through the class. So you don't have to be through the training. You just have to have a majority of people that understand what's going on, as you say, to sort of pick it up from their colleagues to model that behavior. And they become the advocates.
When you split teams, that sort of mitosis concept we talked about earlier, do you go back through some context setting or other things? Like, is there other things that you need to do to help make that successful?
Well, certainly you want to talk to the sort of the business side of that to let them understand what's going to happen. So again, this is coaching the management team about that. But you bring your manager with you so he can sort of tell firsthand, here's what I thought would happen, here's what actually happens. You want to bring him with you to help understand. And you want to make sure they sort of form their own little community of management about how to work around this system. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure they're dropped into an environment that's going to be successful. One of our biggest successes in Norway was we butted off our team right before COVID hit. And COVID hit, and this is the team that within 2 weeks rewrote the unemployment benefit so they could respond to the new unemployment benefit claims that were coming in. Because we were used to getting 100 a week and we're getting 1,000 a day. The old system couldn't handle it. And these guys developed a system that would support handling that within a couple of weeks. That's how powerful one of these budding off teams are. You give them a crisis, give them a good problem to solve, and just get out of their way. That's the key thing. Be the concierge.
I was going to say, it's that and the power of a crisis, isn't it?
Well, yeah, desperate times call for innovation. Innovation really occurs in zones of discomfort. So if you look at most of the innovation, it almost occurs in most of the environments in wars. Velcro, Vietnam War. We can't have brass buttons, they rust. So we use Velcro. Frozen food for the astronauts. I mean, you look at all the innovations. Innovations come in sort of necessities. So that's why a client that's kind of desperate, a client that has a problem that they're having trouble solving, they're the good client to have innovation, go in there and innovate ways. If a client's been highly successful, they're making money like crazy, and you come in there and say, I want to change your process, you're not going to get very far. Those are the guys that decline the opportunity.
Fred, you seem to have caught many different waves throughout your career. So you're an early experimenter in microservice architectures. You're involved in sort of computer networking in the 70s, Lands and GUI in the 80s, OO and Agile in the 90s. So how do you keep on top of things and keep being an early adopter of these sort of waves or trends?
Well, I use my fat pigeon theory. So the fat pigeon theory comes from me working in London and watching pigeons as I walk back and forth to work. A lot of pigeons to see. And if you look at pigeons, one of the things you'll see is there's a pigeon over there going like this. And all the other pigeons look over there and say, I don't know what's going on with it, but I should fly over there because it's probably food. And so all the other pigeons fly over there. Of course, the big fat pigeon's the one that gets the food. So there's certain pigeons I watch.
Okay.
So when Martin Fowler starts talking about something, or Kent Beck starts doing something novel, or Dave Thomas starts doing something novel, I'm one of these fat pigeons. I don't know what's going on over there, but I'm going to fly over there anyway. So Dave Thomas would start playing with Ruby, and I say, well, what's this Ruby nonsense? But I'm going to fly over there because it looks pretty cool. So I fly over there, and it turns out it's a good idea. Or same thing about Agile. You hear Martin Fowler and Mort Cunningham, these guys stand up and talk about Agile when it's only one piece of paper. And you say, well, wow, I'm a fat pigeon. That if these guys are feeding off this thing, I'm going to fly over there and try that as well. It looks like a good meal. So basically, I'm looking for fat pigeons. So again, there's people I tend to watch. If they start doing something, I'm going to go over there and see what it is, because I kind of believe they're looking after better than I.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a lazy fat pigeon. What can I say?
It sounds like advice for all CTOs. Be a fat pigeon. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's things like the technology radar that comes out from ThoughtWorks. Hopefully they're still publishing that. I haven't looked at it for a while, but the technology radar is gold. I mean, these are some of the best minds in our industry saying these are things you should be looking at. And you need to take that seriously as a CTO. Whereas if you're doing something they say is on the outs, you got to be thinking about how you're going to get off with that stuff. Because again, these are really bright people saying this is fundamentally a flawed approach to doing development. Your competitors will not make this mistake. You need to stop doing it as well. And you need to be experimenting with some of the new stuff. Again, piloting projects. I'm a big person on experimentation. So give me a team, give me a problem, let me experiment and try something. I was doing this in India a few months ago. And immediately the people in Denmark wanted to know exactly what's going on and how you got to review this with me and all this other stuff. Go away. I'll come back to you in a week, but I'm going to get this thing started. I'll tell you what it looks like in a week, but I'm not going to tell you what is happening right now. I had to put them off until you're ready to have that conversation because I'm running an experiment. I don't need them to see all the little things going wrong. I need to tell them what I figured out at the end of that process. So don't necessarily try to convert everybody over to this new way of working, convert some. I was working with one of the retailers in the UK, and they actually had 3 different organizations working on 3 different types of problems with 3 different processes. They had a back-end system for supply chain and all this other stuff. Very traditional system, very traditional roles, very traditional release schedules. Then they had a team that was making small changes to this sort of on an iteration basis. So every iteration, they put something, a little feature out or feature out here or there. Then they had the guys working with a kiosk that's sitting in the store where you can take a pair of jeans and scan them and go have your size delivered to you. They were making 3 or 4 changes a day. So they had 3 different teams with 3 different processes in place. So if you're a CTO, you look around and everybody's doing it exactly the same way, then you're doing it wrong. Find a group that you need to do something different in or wants to do something different that you think makes sense for doing something different and let them try something different. The worst that happens is you learn something from this process and say, don't repeat this somewhere else. Or in best case, you find a better way doing business for the entire organization.
In other talks you've given, I've heard reference to Kinefin and other concepts. Is that sort of how you think about what approach may be in what context, or do you prefer just to discover it through the experimentation of what fits a given area?
You pretty much know when you hear the problem which probably fits in the Kinefin model. So I'm looking for, is it a fuzzy problem or not a fuzzy problem? Fuzzy being my word for sort of the is it unpredictable or is it very straightforward? Giving you a loan is a very straightforward process. There's paperwork to be signed and all these other things. Deciding whether you should get the loan or not is a different process. That's a fuzzy problem. So if you're working a fuzzy problem, I'm going to pull like different technologies and different processes in place to support fuzzy sort of problems. Because fuzzy problems are best solved by having lots of experimentation. You have competitive advantage in how fast I can experiment and try things. And because it's a fuzzy problem, something that worked for 3 months in a row may not work in the 4th month. Turn it off. You want to be in that sort of mode of working. Now, as a more traditional problem, I like to use more traditional processes. I like using storyboards and card walls and have retrospectives and things like that. That process fits very nicely. So I usually try to fit the process to the sort of problem they're trying to solve. Now, again, most organizations have both types of problems, and they try to solve them with the same process, and that's a mistake. It's 2 different processes to solve 2 different types of problems. So again, that's part of the coaching of the executives of what's going on in doing that. Again, when we did this original Norwegian stuff, we had 2 different problems we were trying to solve in only 8 weeks. There was one fuzzy and one non-fuzzy. And we deliberately had both problems to solve. And we put 2 different sort of processes in place based upon that. And we were moving people back and forth between 2 processes. And it wasn't a problem either. But yes.
Are the organizations that engage you always clear on the problem? And if not, how do you engage them on that to make the problem more clear?
Well, to some degree, you need to become a business analyst yourself. So a little bit of my background, I do have a business degree. I have worked in a lot of different domains. So one of the things I want to do is understand what problem you're trying to solve and see if you're thinking about it correctly. I had one team that said we're handling leasing of space. And so they thought the basic resource is a lease. You have this lease and then you can have a new lease. And the answer was no. That's not the right model. The right model is from the end of one lease to the beginning of another lease. It's that transition time you're trying to minimize. That's where all your effort needs to be involved. That's the hard part. So you're modeling the wrong thing. It's not the lease you're trying to model. It's the spaces between the lease you want to model. Like, what do you need to do? You got to get the carpets clean. You got to repair the furniture. You got to find a new leasee. He's got to put a deposit down. You got to get the keys back. I mean, it turns out there's a lot of stuff in that process. And the more you can squeeze that down, the more money the landlord makes. They miss that. I was working on a different problem in Norway about sickness benefits. And I looked at the current model they had, and of course, the sickness benefit is based upon how many days you're sick. They hadn't modeled the concept of a sick day. It wasn't in their model. How can you not model sick days when it's all about sick days? Well, we're using an array over here. No. You got to think about it from a business perspective. It's a sick day. Let's model it the way the business talks about it. So to some degree, I'm playing business analyst as well, and looking at that early thing. So you give me about an hour or so with your domain, I can begin to feel it's fuzzy or not fuzzy. Give you a little more time with that, I can probably tell you what sort of domain model you should probably be using for it. And getting you the right head start on those two items about what sort of process to use and what sort of architecture makes sense for you, that carves months off your schedule getting it right the first time. So my value to organizations is probably in that first six months or so. After that point in time, I'm just a good programmer. And yeah, I am a good programmer, but you could probably find good programmers elsewhere.
It sounds like you're aiming for the redundancy model.
Frankly, if you have more than 6 months of me, you're probably getting overloaded. You get tired of me. One of the things I know about myself is if it's working really well, I can still make it better. So I'm constantly tearing down something I've just built and trying to make it better. And at some point, management realizes, we're really okay. We don't need to make it any better. We're fine right now. Go do something else. And I'm certainly okay with that. That's certainly their call.
Sort of like the S curve of your engagement. It's sort of like you've brought about the change and it's reached some stability, and you could bring it to another area of instability for even more growth. But if people are happy where they're at, then that's a good time.
Yeah, I'm probably better off finding another team that needs to move. They're further down the S curve and they need to move a little bit more aggressively. I'm probably better off working with those people. And I do get bored after a while doing the same thing with the same group. So my longest engagements tend to be 6 to 8 months. That's more than enough time. Usually 2 to 3 months. 3 months is probably a safe number. 2 months sometimes is short enough to get that sustainable change.
So if you had advice for CTOs, so our audience, whether they're listening live or will watch the recording through YouTube and LinkedIn and all the places we put it, what might some of your advice be to them?
Well, I think you got to talk to your developers. So I know there's a lot of lines between you and the developers, but you need to have a little steering committee of developers that you pull from. They just sit down with you and developers. Nobody else is in the room. Nothing leaves the room. It's all under wraps. But ask them what's really going on, and not tell them how to work, but sort of ask them what they would do differently. And get to understand what they're doing. That's certainly one of the things that's very valuable and I've seen done very effectively, is have that steering committee. I know that the founder of ThoughtWorks always had his little cadre of people scattered throughout the organization that were line people. They were sort of the people on the line, and he would be in conversation with those guys on a regular basis, sort of seeing how the company feels from their perspective. Second thing is sort of look for those signs that something's going wrong. If your business demanding schedules and you're getting those schedules, but you're missing them, now's the time to try some experiments. Don't be willing to take sort of 5% of your resource aside, hold 5% of the resource aside for you to play with an idea, and use that to experiment with. When I had 200 people working for me at IBM, I always keep about 10 or 15 people on the side that I was going to try and do different things with, to sort of make sure I'm not blindsided by something or try a different technique. And it always paid more than paid for itself in terms of innovation to the system. I had one programmer who was always, I get a complaint from his manager, he's not working on these things I'm giving him. He's working on other stuff. I said, dude, he's keeping us from being blindsided. He's worth his weight in gold. That's not how you should appraise him. He's doing what needs to be done. And yes, I know he's unmanageable. I know he doesn't deliver on what he's supposed to be delivering on. It's okay. I need some of those people in my group. The other thing is make sure you're hiring for diversity. And by diversity, I don't mean necessarily the racial and ethnic diversities we talk about often, but I mean diversity in thinking. I mean, bring me in a closure programmer, somebody who's functional programming. Bring me in somebody who's comes out of the ops side. Stir those guys in the pot. When Nora and I were working at a startup in London, we brought in a statistician, PhD in statistics from Cambridge, and threw her into a group. All of a sudden, big data is being happening for free. Who would hire a statistician to add to a group of programmers? A crazy manager who understood that you do crazy things. And that's the sort of experimentation I'm looking for the CTO to do with some part of his resource. Don't expect a line manager to make that choice. This has got to be done at the CTO level, where you got a certain percentage of resource for playtime to try these things out.
It also expands the employment pool as well. So I found when I was working in Malaysia, there was a whole bunch of bioinformatics people that had, relevant coding skills and great conceptual models and conceptual thinking. But there wasn't a lot of those jobs in Malaysia. So we hired them in more traditional software roles, and they did fantastic stuff and it helped us move into more data science type work as well.
Yeah, I would say the other thing is go back and look at your hiring model. Hiring models, at best, your hiring is about 70% effective. You're not hiring the right people all the time, and yet you look at the turnover. I had a class with the IBM president one time, and one of the lessons for the IBM president says he looked at us new first line managers. He said, we hired like 10,000 people last year. At the end of the year, 99% of them were still in their jobs. He looked really closely. And you guys are not that good at hiring. You're not doing your jobs, or you're not letting those people that don't work out. Every country I know of allows you to fire people in the first 6 months or so under a probationary period without cause. Nobody I know of tries to do that. They should. They absolutely should be doing that. And so when I identify people in my class that should not be in my class, and I give that feedback to the employers, they can fire those people on the spot, and they choose not to do that because that's admitting I made a mistake hiring. You are making mistakes in hiring. You're making those mistakes. Fess up to them, stand up to them, and fix that. Save your money and spend it on somebody who's really worthwhile. That will also mean diversity is more acceptable.
Yeah.
Let's talk just very briefly. We're running a bit short on time, but very briefly, are there things that CTOs do, kind of traditional things they've been taught to do, or experiences they tend to have that end up causing them to shoot themselves in the foot and get in their own way?
I mean, most of the time, there's no such thing as a stupid CTO. People think executives are stupid, don't realize how hard it is to get to executive ranks. You don't get there by being stupid. You may not know much about a domain that you be playing in, but stupid is not the right adjective for that. So, what would that? I guess the ones I've seen that are doing a poor job generally are basically trying to rely on outside firms like IBM or Accenture or somebody like that to sort of tell them what the right answer is. In other words, they're risk averse. I don't want to try something different because if it's IBM's solution and it fails, it's IBM's fault. So to some degree, they're not trying to basically take the technology risk to keep their companies afloat. Now, all CTOs aren't created equal. Some CTOs work for companies that are very conservative. They're not going to be early adopters. So their job is more or less, let's be the fat pigeons. Let's harvest things that other people have done well. And let's not be the experimenters. But if you're a CTO at a company that thinks technology is a leverage you have to be the experimenter. You have to be taking the chances. So I would say for the CTOs in a conservative organization, you're probably doing your job fine. You're just going to follow the lead of everybody else. But if you're in a position or your company's in a position where you have to be innovative, then you need to be experimenting like crazy and lead the way.
Yeah, it's critical to survive, when you're in competitive markets. And I think in today's age, companies are finding that more and more often there is competitiveness because, global markets, etc. So yeah, it's and also technology is moving so quickly. So that resonates.
Well, a lot of entry barriers have been eliminated for traditional business. I mean, you can go to Amazon and get capacity without having to buy millions of dollars of machines. You can get open source code instead of having developed yourself. You don't need a brick and mortar shop in order to find customers. You got social networks to find customers. And a lot of companies are having their customers, losing customers like crazy and don't even know it because they're being sucked off on the side. All the best customers are being siphoned off and they don't realize it's happening. So just be aware that the entry barriers to your traditional entry barriers to your business do not exist anymore. How do you become that same company? I know there's one Australia bank actually set up their own bank in, I think it was Vietnam, to try different techniques. They knew they couldn't get away with it in Australia with their own people. So they start up another bank somewhere else to experiment. That's clever CTO work.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that was true of most of the recent companies I've worked for, experimentation in different markets where they were smaller and seeing what works there and then trying things in larger markets or larger segments. So we're going to do a very challenging thing, which is to try and briefly recap our conversation, Fred. We may need your help. Now, something I've noticed throughout the course of this episode is how well you are communicating in terms that executives can understand and also programmers can understand. Having myself also worn both hats throughout my career, you're very adept at communicating in both. So that feels like a key headline or takeaway for CTOs. Like, adjust your communication to your audience. Noah, what else have we covered?
Well, I think some knowledge of what your business looks like. So Cadaver model is a nice starting point, for example, and try to match your processes to your problems and realize that all problems are not created equal. And so having a process run by a team it works for everybody. That's kind of false economies. I would say you're hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself in your organization by doing that.
Yeah. And if you want to introduce change, you are much better off getting a large group of people who know how to do things the new way and introducing people who don't to them in bits rather than parachute somebody in who's then expected to save the day.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of agile coaches come in and be ineffective as soon as they walk out the door. Everything they did goes away as soon as they walk out the door. That's not sustainable change.
And you also mentioned starting change with a single team or a single key need, as opposed to trying to spark off change across all teams all at once.
Yeah, particularly with cultures that are sort of consensus oriented, which everybody sort of has to agree to everything before you move forward. I have that a lot of my Nordic colleagues. They like to everybody agree before you do anything. No, you want to say, let's just experiment off from the side and stay away from me until I figure this stuff out. Then I'll come back and see you. Cultures that are much more authoritative. I'm thinking of USAA Insurance, for example, with a military background, and IBM. They have much better processes about trying experiments in that environment. But yeah, consensus cultures are kind of inhibitors sometimes to change. Just be aware of that.
Yeah. And we started the whole session with engaging with programmers and meeting them where they are, which I think was a thread throughout. Fred, if where do people find you? How do they get in touch if they wanted to have a chat with you?
Well, my email is pretty much everywhere. It's the easiest reach by email, and if you go to YouTube and put in Fred George and something about programming, because Fred George actually just gets you Harry Potter hits, because the Weasley twins are Fred and George. So ignore all the Harry Potter hits. If you get through the Harry Potter stuff, you'll see me up there on presentations. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find in various sundry ways. But yeah, if you have an interesting location, an interesting problem to solve that you think is pretty close to impossible, yeah, give me a thought. Give me a thought.
We
even in New Zealand.
One of the things I do is travel is built into my rate, so you don't have to worry about what continent I'm coming from. That's not a problem you have to worry about.
I think we missed a trick not having the Mission Impossible music, as Fred was saying that.
Yeah,
you may have to
put it in post.
Dub that back in on the next when you dub it back. Yeah.
Very good. What about you, Noah? Where do we find you?
You can find me at my website, noahcantor.com. At the moment, next week, I'm going to be hosting a webinar about what are the 3 keys to being a successful tech leader. So I'll be talking about that. You're welcome to show up. I'd love to have you.
Excellent. And what am I doing at the moment? So I'm pretty much finished up and getting ready for vacation, but in the new year, if you're interested in group coaching, you can follow that bit.ly link and get involved in group coaching, whether in Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand. And you can also catch my other show, Open Door Policy, on Thursdays, 1 p.m. Every week up until I'm away December 14th. So after that, it's gone. Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Noah. But thank you so much for joining us, Fred. It has been absolutely fascinating. And I think you've given, some commonalities with some of our other guests, but also a completely different perspective. And I absolutely loved it.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. Good luck with your ventures.
Thank you.